This summer I stayed in Ashwick, Pennsylvania. Ashwick is one of those towns you miss if you blink. One gas station, one diner, a church, and rows of old houses with porches that creak when the wind changes. My aunt had surgery that year, and since I worked remotely, I drove up for Baltimore to help her out for a few weeks. The first few days were normal, quiet, even peaceful. But people in Ashwick had a habit that started bothering me fast. Every evening, right before sunset, they went inside. Not just older people. Everyone. Parents hauled their kids in from yards. Store owners locked up early. Even dogs that were usually barking all day went silent. I noticed on my third day. I was sitting on my Aunt Linda's porch around 7:30 drinking iced tea when her neighbor, a heavy-set man named Curtis, stopped mowing his lawn. He killed the engine and looked toward the woods at the edge of town. Then he shouted, "Linda, get him inside." I laughed because I thought he was joking. My aunt stepped out behind me and didn't laugh. "Evan," she said sharply, "come in." I looked at both of them. "What?" Curtis didn't answer. He just started dragging his mower toward his shed like his life depended on it. My aunt grabbed my arm, because when the bell rings, nobody stays out. That was the first time I heard about the bell. Ashwick used to have an old textile mill just outside town. It shut down in the late 80s after a fire killed 6 workers. The building was abandoned, but the rusted bell tower still stood above the trees. According to my aunt, some nights when the air was still, people heard that bell ring. No one was supposed to go outside after that. I thought it was local superstition, small town ghost story stuff. That night around 11:40, I woke up thirsty. The whole house was silent. I was halfway downstairs when I heard it. A bell. Not loud, not sharp, deep, slow. Dong. A pause. Dong. It sounded far away, like it was coming through layers of fog. I froze on the stairs. Then I heard something else. Footsteps. Not inside the house. Outside. Slow steps on a gravel path beside the porch. Crunch. 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 I moved to the front window and barely lifted the curtain. A man was standing at the edge of our yard. At least I thought it was a man. He was tall and unnaturally still, wearing what looked like dark work clothes. His face was turned toward the house, but the porch light didn't reach him. I could only make out his shape. Then the bell rang again, and he took one step closer. My chest went cold. I stepped back so fast I hit the table behind me. The lamp rattled, and the sound felt deafening. The figure stopped. For a second I thought he'd come to the door. Instead, he slowly turned and walked toward the road. By morning I'd convinced myself it was some local drunk messing around. Until breakfast. My aunt was making eggs when I casually mentioned seeing someone in the yard. She dropped the spatula. Her face went pale. "You looked at him?" That question unsettled me more than anything. I mean, for a second. She sat down like her knees gave out. Then she told me something I still wish I'd never heard. Every few years, someone in Ashwick disappears. Not tourists. Not drifters. Locals. People who went outside after hearing the bell. Or people who looked too long. The town never reported it like that, of course. Missing persons. Accidents. People leaving. But everyone in Ashwick knew. My aunt's brother, my Uncle Rob, vanished in 1998 after going out to check on a noise in the barn. All they found the next morning were his boots near the tree line. I wanted to laugh it off, but I couldn't stop thinking about the figure. The way he moved. The way he stopped when I made noise. That evening I drove into town and asked around carefully. At the diner, a waitress named Cheryl went quiet when I mentioned the mill. An older man in a booth overheard and waved me over. His name was Walter Briggs. 70, maybe older. Hands like tree roots. He leaned in and said, "The mill fire wasn't an accident." According to Walter, workers had complained for months about strange things. Locked doors opening. Machines starting by themselves. Men hearing someone calling their names from empty rooms. The night of the fire, 6 workers got trapped on the 3rd floor. The foreman, a cruel man named Richard Voss, had locked the exit stairwell to stop workers from taking breaks. He survived. The 6 didn't. Walter's voice dropped. Folks said after that Voss started hearing that bell in his sleep. 2 months later, he disappeared. But people still see a man in mill clothes walking at night. I drove home with my stomach in knots. That night, I made a stupid decision. I stayed awake. I told myself if the bell rang again, I'd prove it was some prank or local myth. At 12:17 a.m., it started. Dong. This time it sounded closer. My aunt had locked her bedroom door. I noticed that earlier and thought it was odd. Now I understood. I went to the window. The road was empty. Dong. Then I saw movement. Across the street, Curtis's front door was open. A little girl, maybe 8 years old, was standing barefoot in the middle of his yard. It was his granddaughter, Lucy. She'd been visiting that week. She was sleepwalking. My blood ran cold. Curtis's porch light was off. Nobody inside had noticed. And at the far end of the street, near the trees, something tall was moving toward her. I didn't think. I ran. The second I stepped outside, the air felt wrong. Heavy, like the whole town was holding its breath. Lucy, I shouted. She didn't react. The bell rang again, louder than ever. The figure stopped at the end of the road. This time I could see him clearly. Burned skin stretched tight over his face. Eyes blackened like empty sockets. A melted strip of fabric hung from his neck. A mill badge swung from his chest. Richard Voss. He started walking faster. Not running, just walking. But every step closed too much distance. I sprinted across the street, grabbed Lucy, and she suddenly snapped awake and screamed. That scream seemed to wake the whole town. Lights came on. Doors opened, and then every porch light on the street lit up at once. Voss stopped dead. For a second, he looked almost angry. Then the bell gave one final deep strike, and he was gone. Not faded, gone, like he had never been there. Curtis came running out crying and pulling Lucy from my arms. My aunt was on our porch, white as paper. Nobody thanked me that night. Nobody said much at all, because they were scared. The next morning, Walter came by my aunt's house. He handed me something wrapped in cloth. Inside was an old brass mill badge, burned around the edges. Number 7. There were supposed to be 7 men trapped that night, he said. One got out. Name was Thomas Reed. He was the one who rang the bell till his hands bled, trying to warn the town when Voss started walking after the fire. I frowned. Why are you giving me this? Walter looked me dead in the eyes. Because last night you heard the bell and still went out. That means he's seen you now. I left Ashwick 2 days later. I never went back. But sometimes, usually just after midnight, I wake up to a sound that doesn't belong in my apartment in Baltimore. A deep bell. Slow. Patient. And every time I hear it, I make the same mistake. I'll look at the window first, to make sure he's still out there. When I was 28 and then, my aunt had left me her old white farmhouse on Briar Lane after she passed. The house sat at the far edge of town, beyond the diner, beyond the church, past a row of maple trees that looked beautiful in daylight and skeletal at night. Ashby Falls was one of those places where people still waved from porches and knew what car belonged to who. The first week I arrived, half the town seemed to know my name. "You're June's nephew," the cashier at Miller's Market said. "You staying in that old place?" the mailman asked. Even Sheriff Collins stopped by to introduce himself. He was polite, but before leaving he stood at the bottom of my porch steps and said something strange. "Keep your doors locked after dark, especially if you hear knocking." I laughed because I thought he was joking. He didn't smile. I should have asked more questions then. I should have listened. The first few nights were normal. Crickets outside. The creak of the old house settling. Wind pushing against the windows. But on the 5th night, I heard the knock. 3 slow taps. Not loud. Not urgent. Just enough to pull me out of sleep. I checked the time. 2:13 a.m. At first, I thought it was a branch hitting the front door. The storm earlier had been rough. But then it came again. Knock. 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 Slow. Deliberate. I got out of bed and looked through the upstairs hallway window that faced the porch. No one. The porch light glowed over an empty set of wooden steps and a wet gravel driveway. I stayed there for a minute feeling stupid for being nervous. Then I heard it again, this time from the back door. My stomach dropped. I grabbed the fireplace poker and walked downstairs. The house felt different at night. Too quiet, like it was holding its breath. The back door had a small glass pane at eye level. I kept low and looked up slowly. Nothing, just darkness and the outline of the tree line. Then I saw movement, not near the door, farther back. At the edge of the woods, maybe 50 feet away, someone was standing between the trees. I couldn't make out a face, just the shape of a person, tall, still, watching the house. I stumbled backward and locked the deadbolt, even though it was already locked. I called Sheriff Collins, but it went to voicemail. I barely slept. The next morning I went outside. There were muddy footprints on the porch. Bare feet. Not just one set. Several. They led up to the front door, then stopped. No prints leading away. I drove straight to the sheriff's office. When I showed Collins the pictures, his face changed. Not shocked. More like disappointed. "You answered the door?" he asked. "No." "Did you look outside?" "I looked through the window." He rubbed his jaw and looked toward the blinds like he was deciding how much to tell me. Then he said, 30 years ago, a family lived in your house. Husband, wife, 2 daughters. One night, the wife called 911, saying someone was knocking at every door and window. Said she could hear footsteps circling the house. My throat tightened. What happened? Deputies got there at sunrise. Every door was open. Family was gone. Gone. He nodded. No signs of struggle. No blood. Just muddy footprints. Bare feet. I felt cold all over. Was anyone ever found? The youngest daughter, 9 years old. She was found 3 days later in the church basement. Alive. Collins looked at me carefully. She wouldn't speak. Not one word. Till the day she died. I drove home sick to my stomach, trying to convince myself it was just an old story locals used to scare outsiders. That night, I invited my friend Caleb over from Montpelier. He was the kind of guy who laughed at ghost stories and slept with a baseball bat near the bed because people are scarier than spirits. He agreed to stay the night. By midnight, nothing had happened. By 1, Caleb was making fun of me for being jumpy. At 2:13, the knocking started. 3 taps. Front door. Caleb froze mid-sentence. "There," I whispered. He grabbed the bat and marched to the window. "No one's there." Knock. 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 Back door. His face lost all color. We moved together through the kitchen. He yanked the curtain aside. The porch was empty. Then we heard footsteps above us. Slow footsteps. Crossing the upstairs hallway. My blood turned to ice. We were both downstairs. No one else should have been there. Caleb looked at me and whispered, "You locked the windows?" "All of them." The footsteps stopped directly over the kitchen. Then came a sound I'll never forget. A child's voice. Soft. Thin. "Don't let them in." Caleb bolted upstairs before I could stop him. I followed. The hallway was dark except for moonlight coming through the window at the far end. My bedroom door was open. I had left it closed. Caleb stepped inside first. Then he screamed. I ran in and saw writing on the wall above my bed. It was smeared in mud. "They come when you look." Caleb backed into me shaking. "Someone's in this house." Then the closet door creaked open, not by itself swinging, like someone was pushing it slowly from inside. Caleb raised the bat. The door opened wider. Inside was nothing but hanging coats and darkness. And in the back corner, sitting on the floor, was a little girl. She looked about 9, hair hanging over her face, white nightgown stained brown at the hem. She slowly lifted her head. Her mouth was sewn shut. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. She raised one shaking finger and pointed behind us. We turned. At the end of the hallway stood 3 people. No, not people. Shapes. Human but wrong. Too tall. Too still. Bare skin slick with mud. Faces pale and stretched like wet paper. No eyes. Just dark holes. One of them tilted its head and I heard the exact same knocking sound. Not from a hand. from inside its chest. Caleb swung the bat and yelled for me to run. I didn't wait. We flew downstairs, hearing heavy footsteps behind us, but they didn't sound human. It was like wet sacks hitting wood. We got to the front door. It wouldn't open. The deadbolt twisted, but the door wouldn't budge, like someone was holding it shut from outside. Then every light in the house went out. Total darkness. And from every side of us came knocking. Front door, windows, walls, hundreds of knocks. Fast, violent, like the whole house was being surrounded. Caleb grabbed my arm and dragged me toward the basement. I'd never even gone down there. The air turned cold the second we opened the door. At the bottom of the stairs, Caleb's flashlight landed on something carved into the concrete wall. Tallies, hundreds of them, and names, dozens of names. The last one made my knees buckle. June Holloway, my aunt. Below her name, scratched deeper than the rest, were two words. Still here. The flashlight died. Then something touched the back of my neck. Cold fingers. I spun around, swinging blindly, and somehow my hand found the basement window latch. Caleb helped me kick it open, and we crawled out into the mud behind the house. We ran barefoot through the woods until we hit the road and flagged down a truck. Sheriff Collins and state police searched the house before sunrise. They found the muddy writing, the basement wall, the broken window, but Caleb was gone. He vanished somewhere between the basement and the woods. I know what I saw. I know he was with me. But every official report says I fled the house alone in a panic. No signs of forced entry. No footprints except mine. I sold a farmhouse 3 months later for almost nothing. I still wake up at 2:13 some nights to the sound of knocking. 3 slow taps, always from somewhere inside the house.